Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a warm welcome to our MacTaggart lecturer, Eric Schmidt.
Thank you.
Now, last night, Eric delivered a fantastic MacTaggart lecture with plenty to think about. He said he was our friend, not our foe. He celebrated the internet as a force for good, but he criticised Britain's ability to scale its own innovations. The bogeyman in his speech was the regulator, perhaps, and he attacked the education culture in this country, which he said poses boffins against lovies and fails to teach computer science to every child at school. And Eric, that line perhaps is the one that most captured the imagination of the old media, the print media, this morning, clearly. Have you spoken to the government about your ideas, and are they receptive?
Well, it's interesting that Ed Vaizey called this morning to ask for support for a new bill. I think it's called the Next Gen bill. And apparently in Britain, the government's pretty heavily involved, the national government's fairly heavily involved in education. And they're trying to change the way the baccalaureate works to include art and computer science as part of the normal baccalaureate, and in fact to require the teaching of computer science. So those are two of the things that I talked about that are apparently in a bill pending in your government.
I wanted to say, by the way, if you want to join in the discussion, if you use the hashtag Pentland, I'll try and use as many of your tweets as possible. Asher Tuller already started last night asking, he's one of our comedy greats in this country, who asked if you put Google into Google, will it break the internet?
That's an example of a computer science concept called recursion, and the answer is no.
Okay. In terms of the actual cost of this education culture deficit, how does it manifest itself for Google? I mean, are you having to import talent to Google in the UK because you're not finding it here?
We do, and in fact, the good news is lots of people from the rest of Europe would prefer to actually live and work in London. So we are actually, because we're a draw from a recruiting perspective, people are willing to come. There's a national, in my view, a global technical shortage. Virtually all of the interesting problems we face as a global nature can be solved by more technology of one kind or another, whether it's climate change, various issues about poverty, the aspirations that everyone has to become members of a productive middle class. There are very good technological solutions just ready to be invented. If you sort of don't like the nice way I said that, let's do it the scare way and say, I spent a lot of time in Asia, and these guys are good, they're focused, and they're going to beat us unless we get our act together with respect to fixing our educational systems. So you can pick either one. They both conclude that we need to invest, we, and I say we meaning the Western world, a lot more in what got us to be so strong. The Asian view is that we are history, right? And we need to make sure that's not really true.
I suppose investing in education would be a lot easier for the British government if Google paid full corporation tax on its UK revenues, instead of being based in Ireland.
Yes, a very good question. We actually pay the legal amount of tax that we're supposed to pay in the UK. We operate in a European structure, which is part of the way European laws, and the majority of our taxes do go through Ireland. On the other hand, we also, think about it, we hire more than 1,000 people here. We provide lots and lots of revenue opportunities. We have very large partners. On the order of £6 billion goes in and out of Google every year, providing a pretty significant advertising source of revenue for sort of British entrepreneurs. So it's true that we could pay more tax, but we would have to do so voluntarily.
Yeah, well, but hasn't the culture changed? I mean, nobody blames you for using the law to your advantage, I suppose.
No, it's called paying the legally minimum amount of taxes.
Yes, but we're in an era now where Warren Buffett says the rich should pay more tax. In an era where Google becomes a much bigger player in the United Kingdom, is there an argument for Google to move its business to Britain and pay British taxes?
Well, indeed, our business is partly run out of here. The fact of the matter is, you get lots and lots of benefits that are inured from the employment and the economics and so forth, and the great economic sense of Europe. It'd be very hard for us to go back to our shareholders and say, we looked at 200 countries and we felt sorry for these British people, so we decided to voluntarily pay billions of dollars of extra taxes that we weren't legally required to. In fact, there's probably some law against doing that.
But this is your second biggest market, isn't it?
Britain is an amazing market for us.
But you're based in Ireland.
We're based in Europe, headquartered in Ireland.
Okay. One of the things you didn't really talk a lot about last night was Google TV. And obviously, for this is what people in this audience are really interested to know about. I mean, what more can you tell us about how Google TV will work?
Well, first place, Google TV, it may be a misnomer. What Google Television is an operating system that runs inside your television that allows you to have a full browser and a full operating system, as well as all of the traditional powerful television that everybody here is used to. No one's ever done this before. The demos that you've seen have always been partial. You know, we could show this trick or that trick. In this model, what happens is you have a television, you can surround the television images by anything else, in particular web pages and whatnot. But more importantly, because it's the Chrome browser system, you can write extensions which then take the video and do interesting things with it. So you could imagine a children's show which happened to have a dynamic game that came on top of it, where people would start to watch the television show and then they could never stop because the game was so engaging. So this is why the excitement of Google TV is so high. I believe, virtually all of the television manufacturers on their very high end will eventually adopt Google TV, most likely Google TV or perhaps one of the competitors that will emerge. So we know this space exists. The issue, of course, is getting that started, getting the applications built and so forth, and that's taken quite a while. So I think it'll be a while before you'll see this. You'll see some neat demos.
And is this something that you will keep improving and changing, if you like? Because, I mean, it hasn't been a huge success in America,
right.
has it?
It has not been a huge success, I think partly because, remember, it's designed into televisions. And so the television replacement cycle on the high end is every 5 years, or worse in a recession, which seems to be where the US is, and I think maybe in Europe as well. So what happens is it's just a long design cycle. So we're absolutely committed to staying, to improving Google TV. We've tried various ways of making it available to the existing install base with some success, but I think the real key is it'll just become part of your television over the next 5 years, and all of a sudden these magical new services will appear. I am very convinced that Google Television will in fact increase television viewership significantly, because it's another way to spend time with the television. At the moment, the way the industry is organized is I have a choice between the television or the screen with all the internet on it. If we can combine those two, it should be net positive for television. You
talked in your speech about the logical shift in how we watch television. I mean, isn't the ultimate logic the end of linear channels?
Well, linear channels can be seen as sort of an organizing principle, and you need something for the average person to be organized. You're clearly going to have very important real-time events, you know, weddings and celebrity crises and all the things people care about in uniform, occasional national disasters. And then I think there will be a fair number of people who want a linear programming model. It's pretty clear to me that it's not going to go away in our lifetimes. You'll see a mixture. When I now hear that there was a show shown that I missed because I was traveling, and I look for it and I can't find it, I assume there's something wrong with the vendor. Right? In other words, my expectation is I should be able to see something which I missed. And if I can't, then why not? What are you all doing wrong? I think that's my own expectation. I think it's what the average citizen cares about.
So the mass shared experience will continue on channels.
And it will. And what's interesting is that instead of being the mass shared experience around key events, you know, the special show of this and television produces these iconic characters, these truly famous and creative and charismatic people who everyone wants to talk about. So those people, everyone will tune at the particular time. Its appointment television will continue. For a lot of the rest of television, which is not at that level of quality, people will do it in a more time-shifted way.
In this world where a lot of content is on demand, would you expect producers here to be able to sell direct to YouTube or to Google TV and to bypass the traditional television commissioners?
My own view is that everyone who owns content is going to want to have the largest audience possible and therefore will negotiate it to in some form touch it all. What I would propose is that you will see an inversion of the model, and bear with me because I think this is sort of a fundamental view I have. The stuff you do is very expensive, and you do pilots, you do trials and so forth and so on. Wouldn't it be better if you could release inexpensive versions of it on YouTube and see if it took? So let's imagine, I'll use US numbers because I don't know the British numbers. Let's say that you could build something for YouTube for $100,000 that was 10 minutes long and it was fun and interesting. And then the cost of a proper production for a half-an-hour show or what have you is a few $1 million. So something where there's an order of magnitude or so difference. You could get 10 different shots at, if you will, trying an idea, trying a star, trying a construction, and then measure what happens on YouTube. And then when you come back with some facts, you say, look, I did 10 of these, and this one has this new 21-year-old male star who just seems to have the right energy, and everyone's excited about him, and he looks like he's the next so-and-so. You're going to be in a much stronger position when you go to your distributor to negotiate for the rights and the distribution and so forth for what is a much more expensive show. So one way to describe that is to say that the barrier to entry in what you do has been so high that YouTube can offer an opportunity for you to experiment and change the way you do business without changing the ultimate success model, which is a huge hit on Channel 4, Channel 5, BBC, or what have you.
You see, I suppose some people will say, well, you're asking them to take all the risk, and Google makes the money no matter what through search. What some people were hoping or expecting you to say last night was, we will make money available to content producers. And you very clearly ruled that out last night. Now, your argument for it was very charming in that you said, well, we wouldn't be very good at it. You know, we commission lots of sci-fi. Look, it's not beyond the wit of Google to hire good commissioners and people who understand content. The real reason you don't want to do it is because it costs money, isn't it?
Well, first, it's not obvious to me that a company that does one thing can hire the best in something else. In industrial structure, as a general rule, the best companies do a few things extremely well, and they do those from top to bottom, and they're quite rigorous. So I'm skeptical that even with your great help, we would be able to bring in the very top content people and actually manage it correctly. I think part of the answer to your question is that we spend tremendous amounts of money on video and YouTube. Let me just review with you that YouTube is free, distributed to a couple billion people around the world. It's one of the technological tour de forces of the world to be able to distribute video at that level, right? It's sort of an amazing thing that we've been able to do, and it took billions and billions of dollars of investment over a long period of time, which Google is happy to have done. So our participation is already pretty clear. More importantly, we have spent a lot of time trying to build monetization models for sophisticated content. Many people here in the room have partnerships with Google where you are in fact receiving ad revenue, watch page revenue, rev share revenue, and we now have success models with pretty much every major studio of one kind or another, and it's true in many countries. So we are in the process of building what you just said does not exist. We're absolutely in the process of building profitable distribution mechanisms on YouTube. They do have different economics than what you're used to, but the number and scale of the YouTube audience should make up the difference, and that's my opinion.
One of your big suggestions last night was to keep an eye on the regulator. And you made a couple of sort of specific suggestions. I mean, one that surprised some people was your criticism of CRR. What's your problem with contracts rights renewal?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very detailed thing.
For those of you who, maybe everybody here knows about it, CRR is contract rights renewal. And it's essentially a gate on price increases in advertising, which has to do with the history of the way advertising was done here and the structure of the media industries and so forth. It's a long and complex history. When we looked at it, what we concluded was it holds prices down for large global markets. That's our opinion. And whenever I see regulation that's price regulation in advertising, I wonder who is the victim. Right? Now, obviously, people would like lower prices, but in fact, higher prices produce more money, which produce more investment, which produce more choices, and so forth. Higher prices when they are properly done. And in our case, since we do everything by auction, why don't you just allow that stuff to be auctioned on whatever the market will bear? That's how we typically run Google. It's worked pretty well. You find the right natural price. The more popular things have higher prices. You're capable in Britain of producing global heroes, global shows. They should be paid according to the audience that they can in fact deliver, and not subject to these restrictions, in my view.
Do you fear UK regulation would stop Google becoming a big player in the distribution of video here? I mean,
on a go-forward basis, we're not so worried about it because Google already has so many incumbency advantages. It's more a question of we benefit from having a very, very healthy market. The market that you all live in, the healthier your market is, the stronger it is for us because it means more money and more investment. You know, we are, in that sense, codependent. The same, by the way, is true for the internet service providers. We depend on the internet service providers to provide the necessary connectivity, both data as well as wireline. We need them to be successful and growing and profitable and have access to capital and all those kinds of things. Because
I suppose if you had anything like the share of television distribution that you have of search, that would be an astonishing thing for this country. I mean, do you think there'd be anything wrong with that? If you had 85% of television viewing on Google TV in Britain, well, would that be bad?
It strikes me as it's a highly improbable scenario for many reasons. Television is one of the most regulated markets in the world. Governments regulate, it's true in every country, they regulate it for all sorts of reasons, social reasons, political reasons. In places that are not democracies, there's other reasons why they regulate the television, as everybody knows. So I think the odds of anybody getting anywhere close to those kinds of market shares are very, very low. What I would argue is that if we gain share in terms of video viewing, it's probably not at the expense of the traditional mechanisms. And the reason is that we reach other places that you typically don't get. We reach the mobile person who's on their iPad and things like that.
But because the thrust of your argument yesterday was sort of mocking the sense of don't let people become too successful.
Well, there is, if I may, there is a European, again, Britain is not exactly Europe, there's a sort of European bias against large successful businesses. It's cultural, it's a respect for the underdog. Remember, you know, I live in a world of startups, I understand this very well. On the other hand, in technology, there are scale businesses. Google is an example of one, there are many others, where they're global businesses. And you don't want to cut those off. And I would like to see Britain have produced a few scale businesses that are run out of here in one form or another that really have the kind of impact. The biggest scale business you all seem to have right now is the BBC, which you're very, very proud of, which of course is government controlled and funded through a tax.
Let me bring in a few Twitter questions that are responding to your stuff so far. Steve Hewlett, who's another god of Edinburgh, asks, ask him how TV ads are sold in the UK. If he knows, call me Lars.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
How are TV ads sold in the UK? Do you understand the way TV ads are sold in the UK?
Not well enough against the world's expert to debate him.
Okay, well, there you are. Not sure auctioning content works. Traditional advertising model has conditioned public to value TV at less than it costs to make.
Okay, but with both questions, there's an implication that somehow prices should be set by something other than the market. Capitalism says prices should be set by market forces. The best mechanism that we know to set, and this is a response to Steve as well, the best mechanism that we know is a second price auction, where you essentially have people do open bids and then you produce the best price. Google is the world leader in that. All of the other sales models for ads, including the ones that are the way it's done in Britain, are fundamentally negotiated. And negotiated deals are not going to be as efficient from an economic perspective than the kinds of open auctions that Google runs. And that's just a mathematical fact.
Catherine Rushton asked, could Eric expand on why Google is paying $12.5 billion for Motorola Mobility? Are patents key to the future?
We issued, about a week ago, we issued a press release, blog post written by Larry, our CEO, talking a little bit about what we were up to. A little bit of the background. Android is doing extremely well. It looks like it's going to be the #1 player in mobile phones worldwide for a long time. This is, my Android phone. And so we have lots of partnerships, so forth and so on. We are purchasing Motorola for a number of reasons. One, we like their products, and we think it's useful to be able to have some products that are hardware products, sort of move the ball forward. We've made a commitment, by the way, to keep it and run it separately. That is, not merge the brand. It remains Motorola, it'll be run completely separately. And then another reason is that Motorola has a large number of patents in the area. And unfortunately, there has emerged a complex and subtle set of patent wars over the future of mobile computing, and we did not want to be disadvantaged. That's probably all I should say. The way in the US, the way the laws work is we have a period of time when the government reviews these things. Most assumptions is that this will take sort of 6 months. We're not really allowed to talk too much about the merger until, in fact, it's complete, which would be in about 6 months.
Can we talk about social media for a while? I mean, last night you admitted again that Google was slow on social media. Why was that? Why didn't you get it as an organization?
Well, I think the defensive answer would be to say we got a lot of other things right. You know, when I look back at my decade as CEO, there are many, many things I'm very proud of. In the area of social media, we knew up front 10 years ago that the internet lacked essentially an accurate identity service. And I'm not here, by the way, talking about Facebook, so the media gets confused when I talk about this. So if you think about it, the internet would be better if we had an accurate notion that you were a real person as opposed to a dog or a fake person or a spammer or what have you. And the notion of strong identity was never invented in the internet. Many people worked on it. I worked on it as a scientist, 20 years ago, and it's a hard problem. So if we knew that it was a real person, then we could sort of hold them accountable, we could check them, we could give them things, we could bill them, we could have credit cards and so forth and so on. There are all sorts of reasons. And the internet did not develop this in many ways because the internet came out of universities where the issue of authentication wasn't such a big issue. Everybody trusted everybody, you didn't have these kinds of things. But my general rule is people have a lot of free time, and people on the internet, there are people who do really, really evil and wrong things on the internet, and it'd be useful if we had strong identity, we could sort of weed them out. I'm not suggesting eliminating them. What I'm suggesting is that if we knew that their identity was accurate, we could rank them. Think of them as an identity rank. Okay? So, we've had all those conversations at Google, but the real mechanism that helped this was the technology that was invented first by MySpace and then eventually by Facebook, where you could disambiguate names by looking at people. So if you have John Smith, they show you there's 5 John Smiths. Well, here's a John Smith, and then based on the pictures, you say, well, this is the John Smith who's my friend. And that's how identity is, in fact, managed in Facebook. And we were very, very slow to figure this out, in my view, and I'll take the criticism as the leader. So the solution, of course, that we've come up with is called Google+, which is in essentially early beta. It looks like it's doing very well so far. And it essentially provides an identity service with a link structure around your friends, similar to what I just described. When we've got that, we can improve our products. So for example, if you and I are friends, and with your permission, this is very important, we can have slightly better search results if I know a little bit about who you are. What about YouTube recommendations? We have this lean back model where we suggest YouTube videos that you should just watch one after the other. Well, if I know the ones that you like, and again, with your permission, I can merge that as a signal in and get a better result. So it's central for Google to have such a service, and that's what we're trying to do.
One of the early controversies around Google Plus is you not allowing people to use nicknames. Andy Carvin, who's over from NPR actually, at the festival, is asking on Twitter, how does Google justify its real names-only policy on Google Plus when it could put some people at grave risk?
Well, the first comment is that Google Plus is completely optional, right? In fact, many, many people want to get in. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to.
But you wouldn't use it in Iran or Syria, would you? I mean, if...
well, Iran and Syria let's come back to that because that's a more complicated question. But in the Western world, what we decided to do was to take a position that we wanted people to be willing to be at least identified by some sort of a real name. And the reason had to do with this identity point I was making earlier. So that's the genesis of this real name. And I should say, by the way, this real names debate goes on and on and on. But we want people to stand for something. We want people to be willing to express themselves. There are obviously people for which using their real name is not appropriate, and it's completely optional, and if you're one of those people, don't do it. It seems obvious. In the case of countries like Iran and Syria, and in fact, I'm working on a book on this, so I've looked at this pretty thoroughly, it's a whole different ball of wax. There's no assumption of privacy. Everyone assumes that the internet is bugged and that the secret police are after them. So their sensibilities are extremely different.
Just on while we're on this, what did you think of David Cameron's suggestion of turning off the internet in response to the English riots?
I think it's a mistake. I think it's, and I hope that's a clear answer. It's a mistake to look at the mirror and decide to break the mirror. The fact of the matter is that whatever the problem was, which I don't fully understand, and I'll defer to you who covered it and understand it, I think, probably better than me. Whatever the underlying problem was, the internet is a reflection of that problem, but turning on and off the internet is not going to fix it. You've got to fix whatever the underlying problem is. And I think we're going to see more and more quick reactions of say, hey, let's stop that. It's interesting that in Egypt, there's some evidence that the following thing was true. When the Egyptian revolution happened, a minority of people were busy being revolutionaries, and a majority of people were staying in their houses afraid. And they're online. So the government turned off the internet for about 4 days. They turned off SMSs for even about 11 days, if I remember it roughly right. And as best we can tell, this enraged the citizens and got them to leave their houses and go demonstrate. And I'm not joking. I mean, it sounds funny, but I'm not joking. It's actually it was a strategic error if you're a dictator. Right? It's important to have a list. Strategic errors of dictators. You know, this is one of them. Because if you shut down something that is so fundamental to people's daily lives, it's almost like turning off the water. Oh my God, the world is falling. So while many people might think that things like Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or so forth are used in some nefarious way, and I'm not defending it, believe me, an awful lot of people use these in essential ways every day of their lives. And if you shut them down, you're really going to piss them off. So you really have to think about this. And I strongly encourage not the specific shutting down. And I think one of the things that you conclude is that if you have a problem, one of the best ways to understand it is to use the internet to try to figure out what the problem is. And shutting it down is exactly the wrong way to do that.
Before I open it up, I just want to come to what a lot of people think is the nub of this, which is advertising revenue. So far, there is relatively little evidence that advertising on the internet is taking away from advertising on television. But as these industries are coming together, are converging, clearly the trade-offs are going to be much more obvious.
But can I just...
let me finish the question.
I want to argue with your question before you finish.
No, I know, but you'll pick apart the premise. I don't want you to do that.
That's my goal.
The basic problem is there is ultimately a pot of money that advertising agencies are going to have to spend. How can you be a friend, not a foe, when you want to take more and more of that pot?
But see, this is the pie is smaller argument. Why don't we make the pie bigger? I'm actually quite serious. The question over and over again about the internet is how does it displace some existing and fixed revenue stream? It's not how the world works. The way the world really works is you build new businesses. The majority, as best I can tell, of money that Google is getting is in fact new money created by new uses and so forth and so on, new customers of one kind or another. There's no evidence that the majority of the money that we've created is taken out of anyone. We've grown the market. Growth is the solution to virtually all societal problems. So that's what the problem I have with the premise of your question. So I would argue that the goal we should have jointly is to grow the advertising revenues, to get more viewers on television, more people spending more time on television. At least in the numbers in the numbers and groups that I have seen, television viewership is declining gracefully. That's bad for all of us. Let's reverse that. Let's grow it. So I disagree with the premise. Now, if in fact there is a collision, that collision, let's assume for purposes of argument that my naive view is wrong, that in fact it is an exact fixed pool, right, and it's a win-lose situation. It's going to be more efficient to run an advertising market using real numbers and real auctions. People will really know what this stuff is worth. I'll tell you a story. When my first year at Google, I didn't really understand advertising very well, and I was absolutely terrified. We were selling advertising the way that it's sold today by most of your industries. We had a sales team headed by Tim Armstrong, who was very good at the time, who sat there and they would do fixed price sales for advertising. And I remember sitting down with an executive, his name is Salar, who now runs YouTube, and he had proposed this new auction-based system. And I looked at him, we had no cash as a company. I said, promise me you're not going to bankrupt the company. Promise me that when we run this auction, that the amount of money we're going to get is going to be kind of the same that Tim's team is able to get by these negotiated things. I was so worried, I put in place a cash restriction program where we would not even pay our bills for 2 months because I was afraid of going bankrupt. This is in my first few months as a CEO. We turned the system on, and because we were mispricing, we didn't realize how valuable our ads were. Our revenue tripled, and we quickly forgot our constraints. Every once in a while, an efficient market produces huge jumps in revenue, and the rest is history. And all these people went on to have great careers and have a big impact.
And are you happy to share all the new data you're going to get on what people are watching online with the content creators?
So we are subject
4, ITV.
to the privacy constrictions. We absolutely do, and as part of the agreements, we do that already.
Even on search?
Not on search. On watching, yes.
Right.
The search rules are different because search is so sensitive. We can't agree to sort of show snippets of searches to other parties. It's fundamentally regulated.
Right. Okay. Can we get the lights up, and let's bring in the audience. Who'd like to kick off? Yeah, there's a hand up there. Microphone 4. Gentleman in the blue shirt, and then down here on the front row. Microphone 1.
Simon Mundy from the Financial Times. Interested in Google TV. You initially, in the first version, had Logitech and Sony as your partners. Version 2, will both of those still be on board? And if not, will they be replaced by somebody else?
I believe that they're both going to be on board, and I believe that there are many more coming. And wait shortly for an announcement on the other names.
Was it priced wrong in America? Was it just wrong because the price has been dropped?
I think it's a beta product. You know, Google typically brings out beta versions, and they're not for the faint of heart. And I think that's what you saw. We're not able to get the product perfect before we ship it. We have to iterate with our customers.
Down the front here.
Hi, good morning. I'm John McVeigh from PACT, the Independent Producers Trade Body. I'll stand up so you can see me. A couple of things I'd like you to reflect on. You talked about our education system. I think we're probably all in the same boat, apart from Asia on that one. You talked about regulation, and coming from a sector which has benefited heavily from regulation, become very successful. I don't necessarily agree with all of your points about that. But one area which I think you didn't reflect on, and I think it plays out to the debate we had earlier in the year about Hargreaves and Silicon Roundabout, and why would we have Google here because of British copyright legislation. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think the heart of the matter is our financial community, who don't really back us, don't really back British businesses. And having just seen one of my major production companies, Shed, being bought by Warner's, that company could be bought by any British company at any time, and it was bought by an American company. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about the British financial community, both in terms of software and content. But I've got another proposal. I agree you should not get into funding content. That you're not any good at it, stick to your knitting. Lit broadcasters, and if you've been into the controller sessions today, you'll see that we have a very eclectic, weird bunch of people who work in this industry. But one thing I think you can do for content is pay us more from your ad revenues. That go right back into us investing back in content, which would be a reward for you.
Okay, thanks.
So a couple of things. First, in the negotiated deals that we do with content partners, the vast majority of the revenue goes to the content partners, precisely for that reason. With respect to the problems of the small companies in Britain becoming very successful, there appear to be a set of them. And in talking to the government, talking to other people, one, as you pointed out, is that the financial models don't, people are not accustomed to operating at the scale. They don't say, oh, let's come up with $1 billion worth of debt, monetize the debt for the next 5 years in the way that a US financial system would do. It strikes me as that's a relatively straightforward thing for the British financial system to be able to do. Certainly the people are plenty smart, and certainly there's enough liquidity in the market. So I think that is something that can be addressed. The other thing that people have told me is somewhat more cultural, that there's a tendency to sell out by the founder, maybe not in your case, a little early. I teach at Stanford, and I teach in entrepreneurship. And one of the things that we teach is if you've got something that's growing quickly, don't sell. Don't sell at all, no matter what, because growth compounds so quickly. And in scale businesses, you get many positive returns to scale. You get the first phone call, you get first mover advantage, all the things that people have studied and understand in economics now. And there's a tendency when a company gets to be a certain size, and the entrepreneur is going to make, you know, 10 million pounds, 50 million pounds. You know, these are big numbers. They tend to say, sounds pretty good to me, okay. And I've sort of done this for a while, and I have other things I want to do, rather than sticking to it. So I think it's more than just the financial system. It's a cultural expectation of what is enough, right? And it's also the regulatory environment. And it sounds like you and I do disagree on some of the regulatory issues. In general, I think that the regulation tends to over-constrain new initiatives. Regulations, at some level, regulations always favor the regulated because it's the regulated who are talking to the regulators. And to some degree, regulation always shuts off a new opportunity because the new opportunity isn't there at the table to make sure the regulations allow for them. And this is the point we were trying to make about the Hargraves report, which we support.
Yes.
My name is David Graham from Attentional. Eric, you implied last night that you were surprised, I think, that Britain was not the dominant media player in Europe. You know, with all the advantages we have, the English language, the fact that English language content is quite acceptable in other language markets. And yet we're not, and you implied that was because of regulation, a proposition I probably agree with. I don't think deregulating CRR is going to quite cut it. What other steps would you recommend or like to see in order to enable us to reach our potential in that space?
It's a good question. I would view this as a shared problem. I don't come as an oracle who has the answers to this. To some degree, maybe I could point out that you're not fully performing to the opportunity that's before you for whatever reason. So I think you should go back to the regulators. If you disagree with my observation with CRR, okay, come up with some other thing. There's something holding this back.
Saying that we need a bit more than that.
You need more than that. And you know, it may be that protectionism in other countries is preventing your ability to sell your product. If so, then let's get arguing about that. Or perhaps it's access to larger capital. There is some additional capital required. If you look, for example, America is full of British television shows that have been repurposed in America with American stars, right? That's another example. So there's example after example where Britain was the origination of an idea, where the ownership and the economics are now being held elsewhere.
On Twitter, somebody asks, actually, with reference to your tribute to Steve Jobs last night, Steve Jobs is a CEO in whom consumers relate to on a personal level. Is his departure an advantage to Apple competitors?
Well, Steve will be chairman and for a long time. And you know, I worked closely with Tim when I was on the board, who will be a very fine CEO. So I think not. Apple's going to do really well. Look at the quality of their products. I mean, they've done a tremendous job.
Yes, number 4.
Martin Stott from Channel 5. You had some warm words in your speech last night about the agreements you've got with Channel 5 and with Channel 4. And you also spoke last night and again this morning about advertising regulation and in particular about CRR. Now, CRR was introduced by the competition authorities in order to regulate the market's leader and to ensure that it wasn't too dominant within the market. If you remove CRR without putting anything in its place, what then happens is that the market leader, ITV, becomes more dominant to the detriment of companies like Channel 5 and Channel 4. And I wondered if that was what you wanted to see, that the company that's already the leading commercial broadcaster becomes ever more dominant.
Well, no, I appreciate the question and also your clarification. I want more competition. And I'm a capitalist, and I always worry about restrictions in that. So I would simply ask, and again, you assert these as facts, so I won't debate the factual basis. If it's completely agreed that everything you just said is true, then there must be other ways of bringing in competition. But it's also possible that the restrictions are preventing something important to happen that would grow the market, and that's the way I would ask the question.
It raises what some people were saying last night, which is that regulation is often used as something to beat. It's producing good things as well, and some people think that having a regulated television industry in this country is one of the reasons it's of such high quality. Could you see any sense in that?
I think there's a pretty straightforward reason why the television here is very high quality. Is because first you have a lot of talent, and second, the BBC, because it has essentially a license fee, has a reasonably predictable revenue stream, which makes it a little easier to take a longer term view, which is to their benefit, and I think we as viewers see that.
So are you saying there is no good that comes of regulation at all?
In general, well, again, I speak as an American entrepreneurial capitalist who's a technologist. And so my bias is pretty clear. And I would say that there's a tendency to over-regulate. There are very few cases where people are under-regulated. So if you want to grow really fast, in my view, you start by saying, is this regime of regulation, which may have indeed be exactly correct at a time when, as the earlier gentleman said, ITV, Channel 4, we're trying to get Channel 4, Channel 5 established and so forth, is that still present? One of the things you want to be honest about, and you need to be honest about this, in my view, is that bureaucracies of all kinds, we have this problem in the US big time, tend to be self-perpetuating. Is this really necessary? Can we eliminate this in order to get more freedom, more competition, and what have you? If the answer is no, then don't do it. There's obviously some regulation that's needed.
On the end down here, yes.
Hi, Andy McDonald, C21. I've got another question about Google TV. When you launched in the US last year, 3 of the big US networks blocked their content from appearing, their online content from appearing on the platform. How close are you to resolving those issues, and do you expect the same thing to happen when you launch in Europe? Like, what steps are you taking to stop that from happening here?
Well, we certainly think that they made a mistake, and we certainly have talked to them about reversing their position, and we certainly hope that won't happen here. In the United States, what happened was there was a presumption that because we were streaming licensed content on the web, it would affect the very significant amounts of dollars that are going between the cable industry and the distribution companies. And that was what the issue was in the United States. I don't know that we have exactly the same issue here in Europe. But in any case, my message, and it is my genuine belief, that Google Television will ultimately cause people to watch more television, not less, and that it's good for the broadcasters, the cable companies, and so forth and so on. And we'll see what position they take.
Are the British broadcasters all up for us at the moment? Or have you yet to get agreement?
We are talking to them, right? What we learned is you have to spend a lot of time talking to people to get people to understand that this technology is a net positive for them. The instinctive reaction to something new like this is to assume it will take something away. As you can hear from my tone here, I genuinely believe these markets are growing and large, and that the way that you attack them is by providing new products and new services, and then you have a more integrated offering.
Yes.
Yeah, James Micklethwaite from ITV. You said yesterday that the decisions that we make in the next 12 months will impact the long-term health of our industry. Just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more. Was that primarily a regulatory point, a strategic point, a bit of both?
We're at this period in time where the decision as to how you remix your revenue has a lot to do with what will happen over the next decade. Many people here in the room are doing very well with all the traditional channels. Congratulations. If you don't have a good digital strategy, you will eventually be beaten, in my humble opinion, by someone who might not be quite as good as you, but who has a good digital strategy as well, that they can combine the two. So my message is that in the next 12 months, each and every person here in the room should have a hybrid strategy. You should have a straightforward strategy about what you're currently doing. You should have an understanding of how technology is going to move, which I obviously have a strong bias in, and that you should have a definitive digital revenue plan. I think there's multiple ways of approaching that, but you should have it, and you should have it in the next 12 months.
There was a Twitter question, actually, about your advice for tech startups trying to change TV companies' workflows.
That's a very hard problem for a tech startup. What happens is that the workflows in you all's business is pretty highly stylized. We have a shooting, we have editing, we have production, we're trying to put things around, and so forth and so on. There are startups that are trying to build very powerful tools that are web-based to do that, but it's difficult to displace those human structures. We saw the same thing in other advertising industries.
Because if what you're saying is true, then the television industry in this country just isn't structured right, is it? I mean, it needs a lot more engineering and technology in it than exists.
That's my answer to everything. I think with respect, I disagree with the statement of structuring. It's not a structure comment. It's a question of leadership. Since you guys are in charge, you need to fix it, right? The person who's in charge needs to address the reality of the business regardless of your background or whatever, and you need to address it, in my view, now, because the opportunity is huge.
Yes, the lady there. Number 2.
Hello. Hi, Catherine Rushton from The Telegraph. You said that you could pay more tax in Britain, but you would have to be doing, to be doing that, you would have to be doing it voluntarily. Has the UK got its tax laws wrong?
So I get this question in every European country except for Ireland. And I'm sort of befuddled by how to answer the question, because it seems to me that as a shareholder responsibility, we have a job to pay the taxes correctly, which is code for legally the lowest amount of tax in every part that we operate in. And we are simply subject to the European laws, the British laws, and the Irish laws. So I don't want to criticize the tax laws of any of these countries. I simply want to assert to you that we will follow them.
So if the UK were to change its tax laws so that you were obliged to pay more, would you pay more, or would you look at relocating your business?
We would pay more because we have to follow the law, and we love Britain.
Could you ever be tempted back? I mean, what would it take? Would it take 12% corporation tax or something like that?
No, but we're not leaving. What would be
No,
tempted
but I
back?
mean, in terms of where you're based for tax purposes, in order to get you to pay British corporation tax, what would it take? Would it take equalisation of the situation in Ireland?
You'd have to change the law.
To Irish levels?
Well, again, we are, as I said, I get befuddled by these questions. Let's just review.
Well, we know how good friends you are with George Osborne.
No, hang on. Let's just review. We are required to pay the laws, to pay the taxes that are legal in every country we operate in. If the British legal system changes its tax laws, we will pay those laws, pay those taxes in accordance with the law. I don't know how I can give you a clearer answer.
Number 3.
Hi, Georgina Pradhan, Reuters.
Yes, hi, Georgina.
Less than 2 weeks ago, you agreed to acquire Motorola, including its enormous set-top box business, whether by accident or by design, in terms of that business. I know it's very early, but you must be thinking about how you could use that to strengthen Google TV, or is it, and also to perhaps improve your relationships with some of these broadcasters and cable TV companies. Is it your intention to run it as a separate business, like the handsets business, or what are your initial thoughts about how this could help you in TV?
So far what we've said is that we're intending to run Motorola, which would include the set-top box business, as a completely separate business. That does not mean that there won't be, communication between the two, and obviously sharing and knowledge sharing and so forth and so on. It's way too early to discuss the specifics of the set-top box business. For folks here who may not know, Motorola has a very large set-top box business, which is very, very important in the ecosystem for video distribution. There's a lot of interesting ideas people have, but it's governed by many, many things. There are many contracts in place with existing suppliers. There's all sorts of rules and regulations we don't fully understand. And in any case, it's too early in the merger agreement to have any public discussion of that, and we haven't even talked to them privately yet.
Down here, Mike 1.
Hello, Debbie Lee from the Argonon Group. My question comes in 2 parts. There's a clear invitation to producers, and we're TV producers, to trial and grow audiences via the YouTube model as a case to take to commissioners, a successful format. Can you clarify what the intellectual property position is on that once we upload stuff onto YouTube, and what our rights are and how we protect our format rights? The second part of the question is that one of our companies in the group is Remedy. We make a lot of music content. Compelling viewing around music content is really important for the consumption experience. What is the situation with music rights? Because that is a big investment for us on the TV window, to get that clearance in advance. How again, it's another huge investment, and the whole digital rights around music consumption and volume, etc., and worldwide audiences could be a huge expense to us, and we don't really understand that. So how do we get over that, and how do we negotiate with PRS and the equivalent in all the other territories?
The second part of your question is better asked by the hundreds of lawyers that we have who understand this much better than I. The complexity of music rights, the public societies that you were referring to, is non-trivial. what happens is people will typically upload something with more limited geographic rights, or they'll figure out a way to piece part it so it's not fully global and they don't bear all those costs. And there is a mechanism to do it, but it's very real. With respect to copyright, simple answer is that the copyright is owned by you. It's very important that we respect that copyright, so when you upload it, and we're happy to display it on the terms that you agree to. What typically happens is that people will enter an agreement with us where they upload the video, and then they will monetize that using various ad formats. And then the vast majority, as I mentioned earlier, of the advertising revenue comes back. The ads can be interstitials, which are in between. They can be on top of, that is, those ads that are on top. What people often do is they'll put in a video, which is sort of a teaser, if you will, to something more substantive, and they'll have a link to that. So they try to use YouTube's significant traffic to get traffic to their own site, and we encourage this. So it's really a combination of the watch page, as we call it, where you have a separate ad next to the video, plus a link to your site, and then you can monetize it, sell products, whatever you want to do. But that's been pretty well resolved positively. People are pretty happy with it.
Last couple of minutes, so please be brief. Yes.
Aidan Laverty, editor for Horizon. You mentioned yesterday we were just at the end of the first act of the internet. There's much more to come. I wonder if you can give us a sense of where Act 2 is and even where Act 3 might be taking us.
It's worth spending just 30 seconds speculating on the rate at which technology is changing. Moore's Law is doubling every 2 years. Turns out disk capacity is doubling every 14 months. Fiber optic capacity is doubling around every 18 months. This is going to continue for another 10-ish years. So that says that the computers will be 30 times faster and the networks will be 50 times faster. So the examples become amazing, that you can carry around the equivalent of an iPod with 85 years worth of video on your pocket. Right? So you'll never be able to watch all the video that you're carrying in a normal human lifetime. Computers will be able, using various signals, to predict things. That on an anonymous basis, if enough people are doing something, we can actually predict where a flash mob will occur or where a traffic jam will occur and those sorts of things. So it's the combination of mobility, the fact that everybody here has mobile phones, because everyone in this room wouldn't go anywhere without your mobile phones, and the mobile phones, of course, know where they are, they know who you are, roughly speaking, and off they go. And again, with your permission, this kind of information can be shared with the public network. So it's the combination of big data on the back end, these powerful networks and these powerful mobile devices mean many, 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 in my view, positive surprises. One way to think about it is that we're really good at being human, and computers are really good at being something else. And that something else is they have perfect memory, they can do needle and haystack problems pretty well, and they can help you, they can suggest things and so forth. And that's, I think, where the technology will go.
Jemima, number one.
Jemima Kish from The Guardian. I'm just wondering what makes this the right time for Google to reach out to the television industry. Is it a sign of Google maturing as a business and that you really have recognized that to grow you really need to work more closely with content creators? Or is it that you think there is now a genuine appetite and that the time is right in the minds of TV companies to work with you, now that they're perhaps slightly less scared? Or is it out of the kindness of your heart?
I think everybody's kind on both sides. My own view is that the industries have come from such a different background of understanding, of viewpoint, of business model, and so forth and so on. It has taken a very long time for the two sides of the industry, if you will, to agree on what some common goals are. We've owned YouTube for at least 5 years, and during that time it's been up and down, we've been sued and so forth and so on, and we've also built some powerful new solutions which really do directly address some of the very real problems that our television and production house problem, people actually had. So I think it's sort of, the reason it's time is we have a mutual dependency. We've matured both in attitude but also in our technological approach, and on your side, if you will, you all understand that there's a much larger audience available to you as a result of these new digital tools of one kind or another.
You apologized in your speech for ruffling feathers in the past. Do you think that will continue? I mean, or has Google really changed? I mean, you just talked about maturing as a company.
I think to some degree, this will sound terrible, but to some degree, we're disruptive by technology design. Because the internet is inherently disruptive, it will continue to create, oh my God, kind of problems. Hopefully we will handle those better. We can see them coming. We can get ahead of them. But we're certainly not going to hold back. If we see a technological opportunity that will benefit end users, we'll pursue it.
Eric Schmidt, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all.